Welcome. My name is Mira and this is, I would say, one of the most exciting times to be a filmmaker. The tools are changing, the possibilities are expanding, and these three amazing people are at the center of it. As you just heard, Doug Liman has redefined action genre through movies like The Bourne Identity, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, The Edge of Tomorrow, and the three of them are co-founders. Julina and Jed are also co-founders of 30 Ninjas, a new AI filmmaking studio and a new way to work on interactive content. So I thought we could start by just talking with you, Doug. First of all, maybe take us into your mind a little bit and talk about the way you think about emerging tech and what got you excited about AI to begin with.
Well, in terms of getting excited about AI, I think art has always reflected the technology of the time, and this is definitely the technology of the time. So as a filmmaker and artist, I don't necessarily think of myself as an artist because I make commercial Hollywood movies, but still, in terms of artists embracing AI, it's the technology of the time. And really my career was, I started with swingers, and you wouldn't think of technology if any of you have seen swingers, but the reality is back then films were shot on film, and Kodak had come out with a new high-speed film stock, and I was able to use that to make swingers on a shoestring budget that would not have been possible 2 years before. And so from the beginning of my career, technology has empowered me to tell stories. And anytime there's been an opportunity to look at a new piece of technology, I've jumped in because I got rewarded in different ways. I've been rewarded we're in the Guinness Book of World Records, not for anything athletic, unfortunately, but for the first VR series. And then a couple of years ago, I went to one of these Google dinners where they were like, would you think about doing something with AI? And I jumped right in. I was like, actually, I've got a script, movie script, maybe 2.5 years ago. And Google was like, wait a second. Like we were thinking maybe a little short film but I've, for better or worse, I've been willing to sort of jump into journeys I don't know how they'll end. I used to guide whitewater rafting trips. Julina's been on them where they don't always end so well. But the one thing that's for sure is I don't necessarily know what's coming up around the bend. But one way they'll try to navigate us through it as best we can. But sometimes we get to the other end and not everyone's in the boat. And it's, so I've, right now, 30 Ninjas has powered me to make the first fully AI studio film with Casey Affleck, Gal Gadot, Pete Davidson.
Which is amazing.
And then a cast of about 100 other actors. And it's my kind of brand of movie is big movies, big ideas. Like Edge of Tomorrow is a very big idea. It's time travel and aliens. But the biggest thing in that movie is Tom Cruise and his character. And it's, for Bitcoin, which is the film I just did with AI, it's it's a giant world. It's set in the world of cryptocurrency. But the biggest thing in the movie is Casey Affleck's character, Pete Davidson's character, Gal Gadot's character. And I think, when I was making Bourne Identity, and I came from making Swingers and another indie movie, and then suddenly I'm making this big Hollywood action movie, and it was very rough going because it didn't look like what the studio was expecting a movie to look like, and because I was bringing some of this new technology I used in Swingers, in which the studio was saying Bourne Identity looks like shit. That literally was was said to me at the time. They're like, 'cause it didn't look like what they expected, a spy movie to look like. And at some point, Stacey Snider was running Universal, was starting to yell at me that Bourne Identity was not my $50 million film school. And the fact that I'm sitting here on stage, admitting to that now, means that I've completed, and not with therapy, by the way, a journey where I'm willing to look back and then go, you know what, it was my film school. Of course I didn't know how to make Bourne Identity when I started that. I'd made Swingers. I figured it out as I went along, and I think more than a therapist helping me get to that place was an Edge of Tomorrow. We were having some script issues because if you try to do anything with time travel, you'll immediately discover that you'll come to the realization that humans are never going to travel through time because it's almost impossible to even write a script with time travel in it. There's so many paradoxes. And we were having like a meeting where we're really struggling, and Emily Blunt made a suggestion, and I snapped a little bit. And I was like, that's never going to work, because we had like a looming start date, and I was feeling a lot of pressure. And Emily was like, whoa, easy. Like, I've never made a movie like this before. She'd come off like Devil Wears Prada. She'd never been in an action movie. And I was like, well, I've never made a movie like this before either. And my producer, who was in my office, was like, oh my God, you can never say that out loud again. Warner Brothers is giving us $150 million to make this movie. Yep. You cannot say out loud you don't know what you're doing. And Tom Cruise said, I love that Doug doesn't know what he's doing. Like, I want to be on a journey with him as he figures out how to make this movie. And I think, not therapy, but Tom Cruise saying that to me made me look back on Born Identity and go, yeah, like, I'm willing, to stand up in front of you guys or on the set and be like, I don't know how to do this, but God knows I'm going to try, because I'm going to have to face an audience when it's all done. And
tell us how you did it.
So that's probably why I'm probably a pretty good person to venture out and make a film with AI, entirely with AI, when, not that long ago, we were anticipating post-production was going to take 40 years, 40. And I was like, but I know we're going to figure it out. And we did. And we've cut it down to 6 months. But when we embarked on the journey, it was like, this may be at my age, like, it may be like that church in Barcelona, like, where the person who designed it doesn't get to be there when it's done, the Gaudi church.
The Gaudi church.
But I was like counting on Google and the other people in this world to sort of accelerate the curve. And so I showed 10 minutes of the movie last week at Cannes, and it's extraordinary.
And we'll get a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at this in a moment, actually. Well, maybe we could talk a little bit about 30 Ninjas, this company you guys have started, and maybe Jed and Julina, tell us about the company and the types of projects you guys are working on.
Sure, yeah. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for having us at Google I/O. I know this is a developer conference, and we have a very strong roots and a large part of our team who are software engineers. Like, who in the audience comes from software development, creative technology, engineering? Awesome. And I'll assume the rest of the people are a little more film and entertainment. Like, 30 Ninjas was founded really to use new technology to empower and supercharge storytelling. And that's meant like many things over the years. Going back to interactive cinema. We did the first ever long-form virtual reality series in 2015 called Invisible with Google Cardboard and Samsung at the time, and we're actually in the Guinness Book of World Records for the first ever long-form VR series, which is cool. We've done a lot of interactive media. We tend to partner with large brands like Google when they're coming out with something new and exciting to be their storytelling partner. And we started going down this trip with the team at Google about 2.5 years ago, first around the launch of Android XR. 30 Ninjas is sort of, right now our studio has two different arms that will eventually become one. One is interactive story extension and character extension company. We work with XR. We have an upcoming Google Glasses project, which we haven't really talked about yet, which is going to be really exciting. We work with XR headsets. We work on mobile platforms, really to take and create, and Julina will talk to this a lot, I'm sure, AI-driven characters who are tied to linear properties. So like, we're very much of the belief that like, as audiences, we are always going to sit around together and watch or listen to stories told by visionary creators that are linear. And in addition to that, technology and current audiences are really expecting to be able to go beyond that with the characters they love and the worlds they love and the stories they love. So we use generative AI to sort of supercharge an audience connection with a character, a story, and a world where they can talk to them or have an adventure with them, and that's great. And then the other part of the studio is our immersive film studio and our AI film studio, and that's where as we were working with the XR team, they sort of took us behind the doors and were like, hey, take a look at what VO is before it comes out, and we've been working with both our own engineers and the DeepMind team to sort of refine how we do what we do really well, which is work with top tier, sometimes Hollywood, sometimes sports, sometimes music creatives, and creators and endemic digital creators to tell their stories using AI. And lately that has meant a very artist-first, human-first approach to AI storytelling with video. You want to talk a little bit about because I think we'll look at a little Asteroid, a little bit about characters in
Maybe,
Asteroid.
Julina, you want to tee up Asteroid, and then we can watch the clip and talk about...
Say it one more time. Sorry.
Asteroid.
You want to tee up Asteroid?
Oh, sure. Tee it up.
Yeah.
Yep. So Asteroid is one of the projects that Judd mentioned. We created it for the Galaxy XR headset. It's a film. It's a story, a space story that we did that Doug directed, 180 stereoscopic. But after the film, you discover that someone. Well, I don't want to spoil maybe the trailer of the part of the trailer was there. But after the film, you discover that one of the characters is still alive, and you assume a role, and you then try to rescue the character. You engage with the character, who is written with generative AI, Gemini Live, actually, API.
So DK Metcalf, a football player, is
Yeah.
one of the characters in the rocket ship of the film, and he is he's playing himself, a version of himself, a football player whose like manager said, hey, this would be a good thing, do you want to go up in this rocket? And it turns out to be anything but a good thing. And by the end of it, it doesn't end well for most of the characters on the asteroid, and he ends up stranded and left behind. And originally he was left for dead, and then Google, approached 30 Ninjas about like, could we extend the story using agentic characters, right?
Yeah.
And
So the idea was how do we incorporate that into the plot so that basically that the viewer can become a player and participate in the story and assume a role in order to rescue DK.
like normally I have to do like a sequel, but they were like, could we do something where the story could continue if you liked, and you can imagine this being applied to movies and other things. You like the character, you like the world, and now you can interact with it, and it's been trained. So you interact with DK, but it's not just DK Metcalf, the football player. He's DK Metcalf, the character in our show. So he can talk about football because he is playing himself, but he also is DK stuck on an asteroid trying to get rescued. And I've always, Born Identity is immersive filmmaking, right? It's like you're in the car with Jason Bourne. It's why I jumped at the, VR series that we first did, where you had to wear like this cardboard thing on your head to watch. And then when the Android XR headset was going to be coming up, and there was the opportunity to make that as a film for like a really proper piece of equipment, I jumped at that to really put you in the rocket ship. And so whatever they're going to show you here, I dread, because it's not meant to be seen on a flat screen. It's meant to be experienced. That you are there. You are in the rocket ship, and Haley Steinfeld plays the lead, and Ron Perlman's in it, and you're really on the journey with them. But and that's when Jed talks about sort of 30 Ninjas having these two sides. There is, Julina's been doing interactive storytelling and branching narrative since it was first possible. When and trying to figure out lag, if you're going to make a choice, how can it go seamlessly to where we are today? So, and 30 Ninjas is very much a story-driven company, and how can we use technology and to further storytelling? And one thing is and I really, obviously, if you've seen Bourne, I want to get you really invested in it. You're there with Tom Cruise and on the beach on the Edge of Tomorrow. I wanted you to really be there, and the ability to control some of the story. Some of it, because there is a role for the filmmaker. Like, we need to build the world and build the characters. I don't think it's not just explore the world and anything happens.
Right.
But the ability to sort of maybe incorporate the best of what storytellers like myself can do with giving you some control within that world is something that's really exciting to me. It's something that Julina's really been pioneering at 30 Ninjas. And so that's, when Jed talks about the two sides to the company, there's the interactive side, and then there's the other side, which is what empowered me to make Bitcoin, And
Well, why don't, before we jump into Bitcoin, why don't
Let's
we
go.
show you all a little bit of Asteroid? So we've got a short clip that we'll play, and we'll dig into Asteroid a little bit before we jump into Bitcoin.
Stop!
DK,
No.
sit down!
Get out of my face. I have training in 2 weeks.
I can't feel my face.
Keep moving. You can get him. I got him.
Jesus, don't pull those!
An asteroid laden with gold and precious metals passing 200,000 miles from Earth. It's a space gold rush.
How was the landing? Textbook.
You came back on your spacecraft without them.
Oh. God damn.
We had 6 hours on the asteroid. The real problem was the cold.
What?
Attention! I'm delivering!
Stop it! This isn't over!
It's a really cool experience. If you guys haven't had a chance to do it, you can see it on one of the headsets. Really immersive. And let's talk about the character at the end and how you used AI to interact with this character. So as Doug mentioned, one of the characters is left at the asteroid at the end, and the movie extends. So you get to interact with them in real time and talk to that character.
And this isn't the first time, by the way, that I've killed off a character to have, producers come back and be like, bring him back to life.
him back.
'Cause when I did Roadhouse, a key part of that film was that Jake Gyllenhaal had to kill Conor McGregor at the end. It's like an essential part of his arc. And at some point, Joel Silver came to me and said, Conor is too iconic in this movie. We have to keep him alive for sequels. And I was like, no, it's the whole arc of the movie that he dies. Like, that's Jake's entire arc. He's worried that there's a killer inside of him. If he doesn't kill somebody at the end of the movie and then have to leave and go back to the shadows, that is essential to the movie, to Jake Gyllenhaal's arc. And Jake's like, and Joel Silver's like, no, I know, I'm not a dummy. I know that that's essential for Jake's arc. Yes, of course he has to kill Conor. I'm just telling you, he also has to be alive at the end of the movie. And we had to figure out a way to do that. And here it's a similar thing where I've killed DK, and then they're like, okay, yeah.
Bring him back.
It's not the end.
It turns out he's not dead. He's gonna, and that's how we got to suddenly, an additional chapter to the Asteroid.
The real groundbreaking thing that happened with Asteroid is that we conceived of it as the 180 film and the story extension. The story extension, then using generative AI in order to create the conversation and drive the interactivity after. I would say about 4 months before we were going to premiere, Gemini Live native audio came about, which was actually the ability for natural language conversation to drive the engagement with the character was really a game changer. So then you move past the NPC and you can still stay within the story world, stay within the context of the story with the stakes and carry that tension from Doug's film and the immersive experience that you're in headset, and then talk to the character and try to save him. So it's a Unity app too, so you're within a representation of the set as well. Using and leaning on the construct that you, the person, the player, you've assumed you're playing someone from NASA, so you're on Earth, and so you're not seeing a full. It is photorealistic, but it's abstracted in terms of what the visuals are on the asteroid. But DK, as the way that Doug wrote DK and that character, he's extremely likable. Not everybody in that film is a likable character. They end up, some of them, killing each other. But DK is funny and likable, and so you really do also want to save him, and that was the key point and really necessary for the character to work.
And I'm sure you've gotten questions about how did you use AI in this, and did this take the job of screenwriters? And so maybe, Julina, talk a little bit about that. what that's actually like in reality.
I mean, it's not really been it hasn't been our experience, I would say.
Sort of predates AI in a way.
Right.
Right, but it's a great question.
But
right?
it is a
It's the AI
good-
character
yeah.
question.
The AI, right. So for an AI character for the interactivity, number one, there was an enormous amount of writing that goes into it. I mean, it's a novel worth of writing. It's 1,000 pages for DK for a short experience. So there's...
They had to write not everything that DK might say, but they had to train the model.
Right.
They had to put DK through a ton of experiences, and someone had to write that.
Yep.
And then create the game in a way that there's a dramatic situation, and so then you have the game design, you have the overlay of game design, linear storytelling, interactive storytelling, and then needing to care and want to rescue this.
I mean, our
character.
experience at 30 Ninjas is, obviously because we're a startup, we're generating a lot of jobs that didn't exist before that because we're an expanding company. But
We're creating the jobs. We're not generating jobs with AI, just to be clear.
fair enough.
And like DK, and the script is a script written by a writer, right? So there's already a writer and a movie and a script with this character, right? So the amount of writing it then takes actually to craft an AI character that not only like has a complete, backstory and is trained and tuned, but also has enough guardrails around them so that, when people try to mess with the character and get DK to trash talk other players in the NFL, he won't turn off, but he will say like, well, I think everyone who gets to the level of the NFL has to be a super talented athlete, and they're all amazing. That takes a lot, and it takes a lot of humans not only to write but also to test. And then DK tests it, and he's like, yeah, that kind of sounds like me, and that's pretty cool.
But what I was going to say is that there is the interactive part of 30 Ninjas, and then there is the AI side, which did Bitcoin, and on the AI side, because I come from the film business, and I'm so many of my friends aren't working right now. Like the business is broken. Yep. It is for sure. The number of my friends who are not working as writers, as editors, as directors, and what I find sort of extraordinary is how many of the people like that 30 Ninjas has hired, whether it's like top film editors who just, who are not currently working because there's a quarter of the number of movies being made that were being made, big movies like that. And they're fantastic
TV
screenwriters
writers.
who are working, generating the shots for Bitcoin. Yep. And they're bringing all of that expertise as storytellers in the industry and from different parts of the industry. So my experience sort of on the job side is that because we are a startup, we're creating jobs for people where maybe the traditional industry is not currently.
Well, so speaking of Bitcoin, why don't we jump into that? And Doug, maybe you could give the audience a summary of the movie, and then we'll show a clip after that.
So Bitcoin is the story of Craig Wright, played by Casey Affleck, who may or may not have created Bitcoin, and the forces that come out to destroy him. And Pete Davidson plays this, fantastic billionaire magnate who's making the biggest gamble of all history on Casey. And Gal Gadot plays the reporter trying to figure out what's true and not true. And the reason why I thought this story would be fantastic to tell through technology is it's set in the world of cryptocurrency, which already is sort of pitting humans against machine, right? The whole thing is like, do you trust, right? The whole thing about Bitcoin is don't trust, verify. Like, don't trust the humans, verify. Let the computers do it. And have the humans... are humans corrupting the original vision of what Bitcoin was supposed to be? So within the world of Bitcoin is this battle between humans and machine. And I thought, I try to never repeat myself as a filmmaker. Yep. And part of how I do that is by working with different people. There's other filmmakers who their films all look sort of similar because they work with the same, even sometimes the same actors. And I try to, because I'm always going to be the same person, all I can do is change the people around me. Yep. So this time I was like, well, one of the people I'm going to change around me isn't going to be a person, it's going to be a computer. And so I'll make something different than what I've made before. And this seemed like the perfect story to do that with.
This is a full-feature movie that's using AI. Describe to the audience what's happening with AI and what you're trying to do with it.
So, we started down this journey 2.5 years ago, because of Google, of being like, hey, come, let us show you what the future is going to look like. And where I settled at in terms of kind of how AI would work with a director-driven movie, not like some random AI slop movie, but I want something that represents kind of the best that I can bring to the table, the best that my production designer can bring to the table, my DP can bring to the table, my actors can bring to the table. That was the most important part. Was, Casey and Gal and Pete are fantastic in the movie. And I know that because not only can I tell that, but when I show scenes, which unfortunately I'm not allowed to show here, people are like, they're fantastic. And that's figuring out how to get their performance into the computer along with the department heads and the best of all of us. And then, yes, the prompters, who then can add a special sauce so it doesn't look like what I've done before. And that was a really challenging process. And I have to give a real shout out to, or he's going to kill me for doing this, to my producer Ryan Kavanaugh, who raised the money for this movie and embarked on this journey with me when, it's one thing for a director to be crazy and be like, okay, I actually have no idea how this is going to work out, but I'll go down that, and sort of crazy that you would go down those rivers with me, when I literally have no idea how we're going to get through it. But for a producer to sort of have the courage to back a filmmaker and go because when we started this, my estimation, with no exaggeration, was that post-production was going to be 40 years. And it was like, we're just counting on that there are going to be technological breakthroughs while we're prepping and figuring it out, and that will continue. And now we've cut it down. It was, 2 months ago, it was 3 years of post, and now we're down to 6 months, which is kind of fits within a traditional film schedule. But the entire film was captured. All the performances were captured on a stage that we designed over the course of 6 months of full prep R&D.
And it's one set, right?
It's one stage.
Set,
everything was shot on it, no matter whether they were inside a swimming pool, whether they were on a boat, on the beach, in Vegas.
It's like this tent.
And then
you do it
there
here.
are the thing that was unexpected is once what Bitcoin. What happened that I knew, I was like, I'm going to embark on this journey and I don't exactly know how it's going to affect me, but I'm just going to go with it. And one of the things that I discovered was happening was that normally, a filmmaker and the producers have this kind of dialogue where I want to shoot a scene in Vegas and you can't afford to go to Vegas. And then it's like, but how about this conference room in the basement of a hotel in London? And I'm like, no, but I kind of want the scale of Vegas. And then well, if you go to Vegas, you got to give up this. And suddenly I realized, well, I don't have to choose. I can do Vegas and I can go to Antigua, neither of which were in the original script. And I ended up going to, 150 cities around the world over the course of the film because I wanted to do something that captured the excess of cryptocurrency. I wanted to make Wolf of Wall Street seem sleepy. And so I started changing the script. Because normally you take a story and you have to condense it down to 40 scenes and X number of locations. I was like, I don't have to do that. And so it was really, it changed my entire approach to how you even write a script. Because those limitations are no longer there. You can imagine a playwright has to write with this idea of how do I have everything take place in this living room? Because all I have is that set. Here, and filmmakers, you wouldn't think they have limitations, but we really do. And how do we fit it into that box? And I'm like, well, actually, there is no box anymore. The box now is just making sure that everything I do furthers the story. And, there's a lot of talk about job loss or creation. The reality on Bitcoin is that when you suddenly go to 150 different locations as opposed to 40 in a traditional movie, those locations have to be populated with people and characters. So suddenly you have to cast actors, because that was the thing I wasn't going to replace. I wasn't going to do any computer-generated performances, even though there are some, actors out there in the world who computer might actually do a better job than they do. But I wasn't going to do that. I was just going to cast fantastic actors.
Right.
And so, it was causing an issue during prep because my line producer, who was was letting me shoot wherever I wanted in the world because we're creating it, was like, Jesus, you're hiring so many actors in this. There's like 125, 140 actors. Could we cut it down to 70? For instance, like Born Identity has like 50.
Yeah.
And we didn't. That was one of our certainly Bitcoin is different than my other movies in terms of the scale and the number of small characters. Obviously, Gal, Pete, and Casey are the heart and center of it.
And then under the hood, maybe Julina and Jed, talk us through what is it like to work with bleeding edge tech? How did you stitch this together?
So I was on set with Doug as the AI supervisor on set with the capture. We were also running a team of AI artists within the editing so that we were generating, working with the art department and the production designer in order to create the environment so that we could then pass stills and frames and to the edit, and they would start to use that generative footage inside the animatic so that Doug could then see and evaluate how well it was working, and that was our first phase, essentially. And that AI, those, as Jed said, that's a cross-discipline team. There's for screenwriting, they're storytellers from different walks of life, essentially. But we also worked then very closely with, obviously, the VFX. There was a VFX team that was doing. We did capture, 360 capture on set as well, so that we would have people's likenesses. Just to also.
And the capture on the set was, my films sort of benefit from, whatever I experienced before. Like Mr. and Mrs. Smith is the movie it is because it's a rejection of Born Identity. Because it was Born Identity was like, look how cool it is to be a secret agent. And then I read the first draft of the script to Mr. and Smith, and I was like, oh, wait a second, like, why are we celebrating James Bond? Like, that guy can't maintain a relationship across 2 movies.
Yeah.
Like, the bigger thing to celebrate would be somebody who's holding a marriage together after 7 years
Right.
and isn't gallivanting around like a secret agent.
Right.
So Mr. and Mrs. Smith is very different because of my experience having made Born Identity, and because I had made Asteroid, which was all performance capture and true performance and motion capture. All we ended up in the editing room with was a bunch of data. And I was like, holy fuck, how do we edit this together? It's like we have to generate shots from that data first, even being able to figure out how to start to edit. And I was like, we can't go through a whole movie like that. So we decided that the process needed to involve us composing shots on set of my actors. There are witness cameras, and in post I can decide to change it if I want, change the angle. But I have to commit to something on the set, so I have something to edit with.
Right.
Right.
So you keep
And also used in the process of the animatic, some scenes were working or not working in terms of how we were generating the AI and the scene was conceived, and we rewrote and reshot some of the scenes as well, that's not unusual for a film if you want to rewrites during that. But that was just really the tip of the iceberg, like the performance capture and those days. There was 6 months of prep.
Yeah.
There was
we're
4.5 weeks of production that we were in production. So all of that prep, that small sprint, and now the hours and hours of post-production.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, look, we're an artist-first, technology-driven company. And I like to think we take the best of both worlds. The film production world, which is like I've worked in all my life, and it's a very by road, like VFX studios have pipelines, and you have a process of getting from pre-production to production to post that is kind of like written to a degree in stone, as opposed to the technology side of our business, which is agile. Like, we are always adapting everything we do to whatever the latest technology that comes out there is. So we have our own proprietary pipeline and workflows that we can make these films with, but like, that changes, we're not doing it right if we're not changing that like every couple of weeks. And what that means is not that we're like cutting costs or saving money using AI. It means that in the current realities of making movies and television, creators like Doug are like, I don't have enough to do what I want to do. And we supercharge doing what our creators want to do by bringing them new tools, new technologies, and building a workflow around it that enables us actually to deliver something. And the way that Doug deals with the way that Doug interacts with this technology is going to be very different from the way a lot of other names we can't talk about who you've heard of and worked with, and seen a lot are going to engage with this kind of technology. And that's where it's really exciting, and where us also partnering with Google, not only getting a little bit of advanced look at some of these tools and some of some of the things that Doug's saying, now we can do this in 6 months, thank you, Gemini Omni and similar tools, like that's great. It's also about being able to work with the research teams and work with DeepMind and really sort of like learn from each other and say where we really need to get is here. And like, sometimes we get there and then we change things, and sometimes we don't get there and we go back to some more traditional filmmaking techniques. So it becomes like a process, like you can change the film in post as you're going through it. You can iterate and the line between pre-production, production, post is like sort of almost doesn't matter until you get to the deadline, just like with agile software development, where you need to deliver and you're like, okay, here it is, here's this version of it.
So we have a few minutes left, and I thought, why don't we wrap up with some advice that you think filmmakers ought to know or have based on your experience and what you've been playing with. So maybe, Jed, we'll start with you and we'll end with Doug.
I mean, I feel like now the advice is always just go do it. As a young or old filmmaker, and I say old filmmaker because a lot of our team are, in addition to the technologists and the sort of like AI native artists we find, are also like, one of the top feature film editors in Brazil is one of our lead creatives, because they don't make big budget feature films in Brazil anymore. So he's like working with us, and it's not a different career, it's a different kind of career. So we found him because he started making, really amazing AI shorts, and Julina judged the festival and found this short and was like, that's amazing. So like, my advice is always like, use all of the tools that are out there. Google and other companies like Google have handed you billions of dollars of investment to go tell your own stories now, so go tell them.
Julina, your advice?
I mean, not much different than that, except for that I would say also, I think it's a really interesting idea to figure out what the tools can do really well, but also try to break it and try to make it look untraditional, and how can you use and harness that within the writing and within the story. I mean, there's a sense within this story that, some of the art direction may end up being, some of it's told in essentially back in memory. Right, it's told from the perspective of the present to the past. So where is that? Can you lean into what AI can do in the special effects and the visual effects of that? But I think figuring out what the boundaries are so that you can develop your own style, because a model is also difficult to sometimes not make like everybody else's and have person in center frame. And there's a couple of quirks that all of the models have, essentially. So break it and find it for yourself.
I love that. What about you, Doug? Advice for filmmakers here, or even the film industry?
Well, it's almost similar to the advice I used to give, just speak at film schools, and I love sharing, if someone can learn from the mistakes I've made, that makes me feel better about them. And I would always be like, don't try to copy me or copy some other filmmaker, like chart your own path. Like, if they want someone to make a film that looks just like Born Identity, they'll come to me or whatever. Like, do your thing. Like, Swingers doesn't look like anyone else's movie. So in a way, I would sort of be thinking about giving that same advice now, that like, I don't know if there's any screenwriters in the room, but if there are, and I said, okay, who here has cheated and tried to ask, ChatGPT or Gemini to like write a scene for them? And we'd all raise our hand. Yep, hand came up there. Like, it is, and it's terrible, right? You figure out a way how to use these tools to sort of bring out your humanity. but not to cheat and just let it do it for you, but figure out how to empower and let your humanity come through. That would be my advice.
Love that. All right, audience, please join me in thanking Doug, Jed, and Julina.